This is not necessarily an installment in my character creation series, but I do think it's relevant, especially since we just did a video about high-concept characters. There will be times as a dungeon master that you will encounter players who always play the same kind of character in every campaign. For new players, there are some classic tropes that do tend to manifest with their first characters. Edgy loners who never play by the rules are an extremely popular form of wish fulfillment, because that's not how most of us get to live our lives, so there's some escapism there. Extremely capable fighters who don't say much are popular because they're so common in pop culture, from the westerns to the Batmans to everywhere in between. But as people play more D&D, you'll probably see them start to explore other character concepts. This happens naturally as players get more familiar with the game and what it's capable of. They'll explore other options and they'll start venturing out of their comfort zone. And it is up to them how long that takes. There's no right answer for when somebody becomes bored of their usual shtick and starts to flex different creative muscles. But some D&D players might keep coming back to certain concepts over and over again. Now, some patterns are to be expected. Having players who really enjoy playing barbarians or wizards or rogues and always tend to play that class, just with different subclasses, that's perfectly natural. In video games, that's called having a main, right? I think that's what it's called. And this is a game with some very clear narrative influences and expectations, and different players interpret those in different ways. And that can lead to some very specific concepts showing up over and over on their character sheets. For example, another reason why we see so many people playing badasses who are amazing fighters but have basically no personality is because this game has a lot of fighting in it. That trope lends itself well to D&D almost automatically. But some concepts will be really specific. And I know this happens not only because of stories I've seen online, but because I've done this. I do this. In 5th edition, I've played a lot of characters who are former criminals. And specifically, I've played 3 or 4 holy characters, paladins or clerics, who used to be cutthroat bad guys before they reformed and turned to the side of good. The analogy I often give is Saul from the New Testament. For those unfamiliar with the character, Saul persecutes a lot of early Christians, but then he is struck blind by God. Once he got his sight back, he changed his name to Paul. I don't really know why. It was a popular name in the Bible for some reason, and became super zealous for Christianity. But as an adult, hearing the story again, I was always fascinated with the idea that there would be people in his life that he would interact with who still wouldn't like or trust him. And what would that look like? What would it feel like to be someone with a dark past who is totally reformed, but still feel like you have to reckon with your bad reputation? That's actually probably exactly why he changed his name, come to think of it. It's not like anyone had pictures of him. He could just change his name and be a totally different person. I think this idea really kicked off for me when I was reading the playtest materials for D&D Next, which eventually became 5th edition. And there was a background in the early version of the game. It may have been the criminal or the tavern brawler, I don't remember. But the trait you got was bad reputation. Like the song, but I'm not going to play it. I don't want to get another copyright strike. This trait later wound up as one of the perks for becoming a pirate, the variant of the sailor background. And the idea of playing a holy character who had this bad reputation, that concept really sunk its teeth into me. I also wonder on some level if this idea has interested me for a lot longer than that. Maybe going all the way back to the early 2000s when I saw Firefly, and we were introduced to the character of Shepherd Book. Minor spoilers for Firefly and Serenity ahead. His story was always intriguing, but it wasn't the most important thing, so they didn't have time to wrap it up in the show or the movie. I know they eventually made a comic about it, but that's kind of not my point. And while I'm fine with that for the purposes of that story, and I really wasn't as annoyed as I think other people were that we didn't get closure on that story, again, not counting the comic, there's still that interest in seeing what would have happened if the other characters had found out what kind of troubled past Book had actually had. The comic is fine, but because no one else in the show interacts with that story in the comic, it didn't really satisfy me. Because what interested me most was finding out how he reconciled his reformed life with his troubled past. Also, I think I was always intrigued in the question subconsciously posed when Jubal Early said, "That ain't a shepherd." Isn't he? Sure, he may have had a different past, but does that mean he isn't a shepherd now? Now, Matt Colville has mentioned this phenomenon in some of his videos, where players will go down the road of playing specific characters over and over again. And he theorized that it happens because players don't get a chance to explore and pay off the version of the character that's living inside their head. This could be as simple as never getting a chance to take the character to high levels, especially if the main appeal of the concept for them is the build or the mechanics. But from my perspective, I assume it means that these players feel like they haven't got a chance to explore the narrative potential of the character. In hindsight, I think that's true for me as well. The first time I got a chance to play this version of the character that I've described to you, it was for Halloween. It was for a one-shot for a podcast that I used to do. And our DM basically took us through a reskinned version of Curse of Strahd. And my half-orc paladin was definitely a bad guy who had turned his life around. But everyone around him judged him for the things he had done in his past. Now, on the one hand, that's exactly the fantasy that I had imagined, and I got a chance to play it. But I also only played him for one 4-hour session. And spoiler alert, he died. And that narrative question never quite got resolved. So again, with the benefit of hindsight, I think it makes sense that I revisited this concept. When I got a chance to play in a full Curse of Strahd campaign, I unconsciously recreated that idea in a new character. I rolled up an elven cleric who had once been a hired assassin. And what was interesting was that her backstory never really actually figured into the campaign in any meaningful way. After all, Barovia is fairly disconnected from any other D&D world, pretty much by design, but the character was still fascinating to play. She wasn't easy to trust, and she did suspicious stuff all the time. And honestly, I always thought of her as doing the right thing based on her perspective. Her extremely pragmatic ends justify the means perspective. She had a real Tony Stark in Avengers Age of Ultron energy to her. But she also died a couple of times, because she's a character that I played, which means inevitably she died the most times of anyone else in the campaign. I don't make the rules, that's just how it works. And one of the times she died, she basically came back with an imaginary friend, someone that only she could see and hear, and the only individual that she really trusted. So I would roleplay conversations with no one, with open air, or where she was just very clearly talking to herself. So of course nobody else trusted her. She was dangerously sketchy. Now, I really enjoyed playing that character. But it's been about 3 years since the end of that campaign, and now all this time later, as I'm rolling up character concepts, I find myself coming up with ideas that are superficially similar. How about a monk who is a reformed criminal? Or a former executioner who became disillusioned with his king after he was forced to execute somebody he felt was innocent. Those are real characters in my D&D Beyond account, and someday I want to play them in a one-shot or a campaign. And I wonder, is this something I feel like I haven't gotten a chance to properly explore? Or is this just something that's going to seep into a lot of my characters? Because we haven't talked about the character I've played the most of any D&D character I've had. Sweeney, the illusionist wizard. Sweeney was the main character I played in that podcast I did, Friday Night Quests. And he was a red-headed wizard who kept himself filthy and had a troubled past where another evil wizard convinced him to do horrible things, and the tipping point for him came when he had to burn buildings down full of innocents. In my defense, I got there before Liam O'Brien, but in his defense, we're both pretty clearly ripping off Raceland from the Dragonlance books. It's not like either one of us remade the wheel. Sweeney had two other major influences. One of them, both in appearance, name, and a few affectations, came from Mad Sweeney in the novel American Gods. The other was the story of Jessica Jones and Kilgrave. Our podcast predated the Netflix show, but I was a pretty big fan of those comics. And I really enjoyed playing Sweeney, not just because I got to take him from levels 2 to 20 and beyond, but because I got a chance to explore his character growth as he learned to love himself again. I don't know why this idea keeps appealing to me, but I really do love it. If I have a choice when I create my character's backstory between having someone mysterious kill off my character's family, or my character killing some people off and feeling regret about it, I almost always gravitate toward the latter. And I know that makes me unusual in D&D, since I know most other player characters have missing or murdered parents. But I just keep coming back to these concepts of redemption, and I wonder if that will ever go away. I don't mind if it doesn't. It's not the only type of character I play. I've played some wonderful characters who were never terrible, horrible people at any point in their lives. Or at least not in their backstory. D&D during the gameplay can corrupt characters. But hey, maybe it's the influence of characters like Zuko or Iron Man. Those are very compelling characters, and I love playing through those archetypes. Which is a bit ironic, because when it comes to the actual MCU, I much prefer Captain America. and the Vision. Actually, while I was working on this episode, I found a character concept in my D&D Beyond account. I'd completely forgotten about this character, but he's a very loose adaptation of the Vision, and I'm not going to say any more than that, but holy cow, I want to play that character at some point. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, there are a few ways you can support the channel. You can subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out. You can join my Patreon. At any dollar amount, you make this channel better, but the more you give, the more you get in return. So it's a pretty nice symbiotic relationship. You can join my Discord and hang out with other cool people talking about D&D and actual play shows and putting together games and creating characters. And you can sign up for my newsletter to get notified about other cool things I've got going on. The links for all of those are in the doobly-doo below. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.